I didn't walk into a job interview. I walked into a mistake that recognized me before I could recognize it back. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that felt too quiet for a building this expensive, and I hesitated for half a second, clutching the folder that held my resume like it was something solid enough to hold my life together, because at that point, it kind of was. 3 jobs in 6 months, rent overdue by 12 days, and a 6-year-old at home who still believed I could fix anything as long as I smiled when I said it would be okay. The hallway stretched out in front of me, polished. Floors reflecting ceiling lights like a mirror too clean to belong to my world. And I remember thinking I must have read the email wrong. Because companies that needed assistance didn't usually operate out of places that looked like private banks. But I kept walking anyway, heels too loud, heartbeat louder, repeating the same quiet promise in my head. Just get the job. Emily, just get the job. The door at the end of the hall was already open, like someone had been expecting me, and that should have been my first warning. But I stepped inside anyway, because single mothers don't get the luxury of second-guessing opportunities, even when they feel wrong, especially when they feel wrong. The room was bigger than I expected, not an office, more like a private conference space. Glass walls overlooking the city, a table that could seat 10, but only one chair pulled out. Waiting, I swallowed, forcing a polite smile as I stepped forward. Hi, I'm Emily Carter. I'm here for the interview. My voice sounded smaller than I intended, swallowed by the space, and no one answered. Not right away. The silence stretched just long enough to make my skin tighten. Then I heard footsteps behind me, slow, measured, not rushed, not surprised, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I turned, and that was the moment everything shifted. He didn't look like anyone I had ever interviewed with before, not in the way that mattered. Tall, composed, dressed in a dark suit that fit too perfectly to be off the rack. But it wasn't the suit. It was the way he carried the room with him, like. The space adjusted to his presence instead of the other way around. His eyes landed on me, and something in my chest dropped before I could explain why. Not fear exactly, just awareness, sharp and immediate, like stepping into cold water without warning. You're late, he said, his voice calm, controlled, but it didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like a statement he didn't need to prove. I blinked, confused. My interview was scheduled for 10. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 9:58 a.m. His gaze didn't move, didn't soften, just studied me in a way that made me feel like I was being read instead of seen. Sit, he said, not offering, not asking. And I should have left. I know that now. But I sat anyway, because I needed the job, because I didn't understand who he was, because nothing in my life had prepared me for the kind of mistake I had just made. He didn't ask about my experience, didn't look at my resume, didn't even glance at the folder in my hands. Instead, he leaned back slightly, fingers resting against the table, eyes still locked on my face like he was searching for something specific, something I didn't know I had. You have a son, he said, and my breath caught, not because it was a question, but because it wasn't. Yes, I answered carefully, my fingers tightening around the edge of the chair. Lucas, he's 6. He nodded once, like that confirmed something for him, something internal. And then he stood, slow, deliberate, closing the distance between us in a way that made my pulse spike without permission. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough that I could see the exact shade of his eyes, dark, unreadable, focused. His gaze dropped slightly, not away, just down, to my cheek. And for a second, everything went completely still, like the world had paused around whatever he was seeing. His hand lifted, not touching, just hovering near the faint scar just below my left eye. The one I had stopped thinking about years ago. Where did you get that? He asked. And this time, it wasn't calm anymore. It was quieter, sharper, like the question mattered more than anything else in the room. I swallowed, my voice barely steady. It's old. I've had it since I was a kid. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did, something I couldn't name, something that made the air feel heavier, like I had just said the wrong thing without knowing what the right one was. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a job interview, not even close. This was something else entirely, something I didn't understand yet, something I should have walked away from the second I stepped through that door, but it was already too late. Because he stepped back, just enough to put distance between us again, and said, almost to himself, So it's you. Like he had been looking for something for a long time, and somehow, without meaning to, I had just walked straight into it. I should have left the moment he said that, but my body did not move, like some invisible thread had wrapped itself around my spine and pulled me deeper into a place I did not understand. And when he stepped back, putting that careful distance between us, it did not feel like release. It felt like control, like he had already decided how close I was allowed to be and how far I could go. I cleared my throat, trying to ground myself in something normal, something familiar. I think there has been a mistake, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. I applied for an administrative assistant position. I was told to come to this office. His gaze shifted slightly, not confused, not surprised, just calculating, as if the word mistake meant something different to him than it did to me. You are in the right place, he said, and that did not help at all. My fingers tightened around my folder, the edges digging into my palm. Then, what exactly is this position? The question came out softer than I intended, because something about the room made it feel like asking too much was dangerous. He did not answer right away. Instead, he walked past me, slow, deliberate, and I felt his presence even after he moved. Like the air had changed shape around where he had been standing. He took a seat at the head of the table, the only seat that mattered, and gestured slightly toward me. Tell me about your life, he said, and I blinked. Because that was not how interviews worked, not any interview I had ever been in. My life? I repeated, unsure if I had heard him correctly. Your routine, your responsibilities, your priorities, he clarified, his tone still calm, but there was something underneath it now, something focused, like he was not asking out of curiosity, but out of necessity. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to keep it professional, to stick to experience and qualifications. But something about the way he watched me made that feel pointless, like he would see through anything I tried to filter, so I exhaled slowly and answered. I wake up at 6, get my son ready for school, drop him off by 8. Then I work a morning shift at a coffee shop on 5th. After that I take freelance bookkeeping jobs when I can. Evenings are for my son, homework, dinner, bedtime. I paused, swallowing. That is my priority. His eyes did not leave my face the entire time, not even for a second, like every word mattered, like every detail was being filed somewhere permanent. And his father? He asked, and the question hit sharper than it should have. I shifted slightly in my seat, instinctively guarding something that had nothing to do with this room. He is not in the picture, I said simply, and that was all I was willing to give. He nodded once, like that confirmed something again, always confirming something I did not understand. The silence stretched, but it was not empty. It was heavy, like something was building just beneath the surface. I felt it before I saw it, the way his focus shifted. Again, narrowing, tightening, his gaze dropped back to my face, to that same place just below my eye. And this time, I felt it, the weight of it, like he was not just looking at a scar, he was looking through it, past it, into something that did not belong to me anymore. How old were you when you got it? He asked, quieter now, more controlled, and I frowned slightly, trying to remember something I had not thought about in years. 7, maybe 8, I said. I do not really remember. It was a long time ago. That was not entirely true, but it was close enough to be safe. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign that something had shifted inside him. You do not remember, he repeated, not questioning, just stating, and I shook my head, more firmly this time. No. For a second, something passed through his expression, something almost human, almost disappointed, but it was gone before I could be sure it was ever there, replaced instantly by that same controlled composure, that same unreadable calm. He leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me again, but differently now, like he had moved from searching to deciding. And that terrified me more than anything else so far, because decisions meant consequences, and I had no idea what kind of decision he was about to make. You said you need this job, he said, and I nodded immediately, because that part was simple, that part was real. Yes, I answered, my voice steady now, because this was the one thing I could not afford to lose. I do. He held my gaze for a long moment, long enough that my heartbeat started to feel too loud in my chest. And then he said, good. Just that one word, but it did not sound like approval. It sounded like ownership, like something had just been set in motion that I would not be able to stop. He reached for something on the table, a pen, a document. I could not see clearly from where I sat, and slid it slightly forward, not toward me, just into the space between us. Because you are not leaving yet, he added, and this time, there was no mistaking it. This was not an offer, it was a decision, and somehow, without understanding how or why, I knew my life had just changed direction in a way I could not undo. I felt the word before I fully understood it. Not leaving. It echoed somewhere deeper than the room, deeper than logic, like a door had just closed quietly behind me, and I had not heard it until now. My fingers loosened from the folder in my lap, not because I wanted to let go, but because I suddenly was not sure what I was holding onto anymore. I am sorry, I said carefully, choosing each word like it mattered. I cannot stay. I have to pick up my son at 3, and I still have a shift this afternoon. I stood as I spoke, slow, respectful, not wanting to provoke something I did not understand, but also not willing to pretend this was normal, not willing to sit there and let someone rewrite my day like it belonged to them. For a second, nothing happened. No one stopped me. No voice raised. No movement at all. And that was worse, because silence in that room did not feel empty. It felt intentional, like everything was being allowed or denied without being said out loud. I took one step toward the door, then another, my heartbeat picking up. Each step louder in my ears than my heels on the floor. I reached for the handle, my fingers just brushing the cold metal when his voice came again. Calm, steady, exactly where it had been before. Emily. I froze, not because he said my name, but because of how he said it, like it had always belonged to him, like he had been using it longer than I had. I turned slowly, forcing myself to meet his eyes again, because not looking felt weaker somehow. You will be picked up at 3, he said, as if we were continuing the same conversation, as if I had not just tried to leave. Confusion flickered across my face before I could stop it. What? I asked, my voice sharper now, the first crack in the control I had been trying to hold on to. Your son, he clarified, leaning back slightly in his chair, completely at ease. He will not be waiting for you. My stomach dropped. Not fear exactly, but something close, something protective, immediate, instinctive. I did not agree to that. I said quickly, stepping away from the door without realizing it, my focus snapping entirely to him now, everything else fading out. You do not need to, he replied, and there was no threat in his tone, no raised voice, just certainty, the kind that made arguing feel useless before it even started. I shook my head, trying to process what he was saying, trying to find the line between help and control. I do not know you, I said, and that part mattered. It had to matter. You cannot just decide things about my life. His gaze held mine, steady, unblinking, and for a second, I thought I saw something shift again, something restrained, something held back, but it did not soften him, it sharpened him. I already have, he said quietly, and that was it. No explanation, no justification, just a statement that landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. My chest tightened, my thoughts racing, trying to catch up to a situation that was moving too fast. Why? The word slipped out before I could stop it. Simple, direct, the only question that mattered. His eyes did not leave mine, not for a second, and when he answered, it was not immediate, like he was choosing whether I deserved the truth or something close to it. Because you walked into the wrong room, he said finally, and that should not have been an answer, but somehow it was, because it told me everything I needed to know without explaining anything at all. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, my hand dropping from the door completely now, the idea of leaving suddenly feeling more complicated than it had just seconds ago, more dangerous in ways I could not define. I thought about Lucas, about his small hand in mine that morning, about the way he had asked if I would be home for dinner, and I had said yes without hesitation, because I always said yes, because I always made it work. And now, standing in that room, looking at a man who moved through decisions like they were already done, I realized something that made my stomach twist. I was no longer the one deciding what happened next, and I hated that more than anything. I need to call the school, I said, my voice quieter now, controlled again, because panic would not help me here. Nothing about this situation would respond to panic. He nodded once, immediate, as if that had always been part of the plan. Of course, he said, gesturing slightly toward the table where my phone sat, exactly where I had placed it when I walked in, like it had been waiting for this moment too. I picked it up, my fingers steady even though everything inside me was not, dialing the number from memory, each ring stretching longer than it should have. When the office answered, I forced my voice into something normal, something calm. Hi, this is Emily Carter, Lucas Carter's mother. I just wanted to confirm that he will be picked up today. There was a pause on the other end, papers shuffling, a voice checking something I could not see. Yes, Miss Carter, the receptionist said, casual, unaware of the weight behind her words. We have that noted. Pickup has already been arranged. My grip tightened around the phone, my eyes lifting slowly to meet his again, and in that moment, I understood something that made the room feel smaller. I had not just walked into his world. It had already reached into mine. The line went quiet after the receptionist confirmed it, but the echo of her words stayed lodged somewhere behind my ribs. Pickup has already been arranged. Like my life had been edited without my permission, I lowered the phone slowly, my fingers still wrapped around it even though the call had ended. And for a moment, I just stood there, staring at nothing, trying to understand how something so simple could feel so wrong. Then I looked up at him again, really looked this time, not just at the suit or the posture or the control he carried like it was second nature, but at the intention behind it, at the way he had already moved pieces of my life before I even knew there was a game being played. You had no right, I said, and my voice was quieter than I expected, not weak, just steady in a way that surprised me, because something inside me had shifted too, something protective, something that did not care how powerful he looked or how calm he sounded. He did not react the way most people would. No apology, no defense, just that same measured stillness, like my words had been expected, accounted for, already placed somewhere in whatever plan he was following. I ensured he was safe, he replied, and that word, safe, should have been comforting, but coming from him, it felt heavier, like it carried conditions I had not agreed to. He was already safe, I said immediately, stepping forward now without realizing it, closing the distance I had been so careful to keep before. He has a school, a routine, a mother who shows up for him every single day. My chest tightened, but I did not stop, because if I stopped, I might lose whatever ground I had just found. You do not get to walk into my life and decide what is safe. For us, his eyes followed me as I moved, not surprised, not offended, just focused, always focused, like even this, even my resistance, was something he had anticipated, something he was watching unfold exactly as expected. You are right, he said, and the agreement caught me off guard, stopping me mid-breath, because I had been preparing for opposition, not acceptance. I do not get to, he continued, his tone unchanged, calm, controlled. But I will. The words landed harder than anything else, not loud, not aggressive, just certain, like gravity, like something that did not need to prove itself to exist. I stared at him, searching his face for something human, something that would make sense of this, but all I found was intention, clear and unwavering. And that scared me more than anger ever could, because anger can be reasoned with, calmed, redirected. But this was something else entirely, something already decided. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to think past the immediate, past the reaction, because reacting was exactly what he expected, exactly what would keep me trapped in whatever control he was building. Why me? I asked again, but this time it was different, less sharp, more deliberate, because I needed to understand the rules if I was going to survive whatever this was. His gaze softened just slightly, not enough to change him, but enough to show that the question mattered, that it had weight. He leaned forward a fraction, resting his hands against the table, closing the space between us in a way that felt intentional, measured. Because you should not be here, he said, and the answer made no sense. Until it did, until I realized he was not talking about the room, or the building, or even this moment. He was talking about something else, something deeper, something tied to the way he had looked at my face from the beginning, like I did not belong in my own life, like I had stepped into the wrong version of it without knowing. That does not mean anything, I said, shaking my head slightly, because I refused to let him rewrite reality with vague answers and quiet certainty. But he did not argue, did not push, just watch me with that same intensity that made it impossible to ignore him. "It will," he replied simply. And then he stood, the movement smooth, controlled, final, like a decision had just been made, and there was no point discussing it further. He walked past me again, close enough that I could feel the shift in the air, the presence that seemed to follow him everywhere. And for a second, I forgot to breathe, not because of fear, but because of the weight of everything that had just happened. "You will stay," he said as he reached the door, his hand resting lightly against the handle. "At least until I understand why." And then he opened it, not blocking me, not forcing me, just creating a path that felt more like a test than an escape. And I stood there, caught between the instinct to leave and the realization that leaving might not mean what it used to anymore. I stood there for a second too long, staring at the open door like it was supposed to mean freedom, like walking out would reset everything back to what it was before I stepped into this building. But nothing about this felt reversible anymore. Not the way he had said my name, not the way the school had already been called, not the way he looked at me like I was a question he had been trying to answer for years. I took a slow breath and walked past him without saying anything, because staying silent felt safer than saying the wrong thing. The hallway outside looked exactly the same as before, polished, quiet, controlled, but it did not feel the same. Not after what had just happened. I expected someone to stop me, expected another voice, another instruction, but no one did. And somehow that made it worse, like I was being allowed to leave on purpose, like this was part of whatever he had already decided. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have, every second stretching. My reflection staring back at me from the mirrored walls, the same face I had seen every day for years, same tired eyes, same faint scar just below my left eye. But now I looked at it differently, because of the way he had looked at it, like it meant something I did not understand, like it belonged to a story I had never been told. The doors opened with that same soft chime, and I stepped out into the street. The city noise hitting me all at once, cars, voices, movement, normal life continuing like nothing had changed. And for a second I just stood there, trying to convince myself that it had all been an overreaction, that I had walked into a strange interview with a controlling employer and nothing more. But then my phone buzzed in my hand. A message I did not recognize lighting up the screen, unknown number. Simple, direct. "Lucas has been picked up. He is safe." My chest tightened instantly. The word safe again. Always safe. Like it was supposed to make this better, like it justified everything. I typed back before I could stop myself. "Who is this?" But the message showed as delivered without a response, and I knew before the silence settled that I was not going to get one. I looked up, scanning the street without knowing what I was looking for, half expecting to see him there, watching, but of course he was not. He did not need to be. He had already reached into my life without leaving that room. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to move, because standing still was not going to fix anything. I had a shift in an hour, bills to pay, a routine that still existed whether I understood what was happening or not. I walked 2 blocks before realizing I was heading in the wrong direction, my thoughts pulling me off course without me noticing. I stopped, pressing my fingers lightly against my temple, trying to focus, trying to get back to something normal. But every time I did, my mind went back to his voice, his eyes, the way he had said, "You should not be here," like my entire life had been misplaced, like I had been living in the wrong version of it this whole time. I shook my head, rejecting that thought immediately, because it was dangerous, because it made everything unstable, and I could not afford unstable, not with a child depending on me. I turned and headed toward the subway, my steps faster now, more deliberate, grounding myself in something familiar. The smell of the station, the sound of the train approaching, the crowd moving with purpose, all of it real, all of it mine. I held on to that as I stepped onto the train, finding a spot near the door, my hand gripping the metal pole as it lurched forward, the city rushing past in blurred reflections. And for a moment, I almost convinced myself that I had left it behind, that whatever that room was, whatever he was, it existed somewhere separate from my life, somewhere I could choose not to return to. But then my phone buzzed again. Another message from the same number, and this time, there was no attempt to soften it. No mention of safety, no explanation, just a single line that made my breath catch in my chest. "I will see you tonight." And suddenly, the distance between his world and mine did not feel like distance at all. I read the message 3 times before the words settled into something real, not because they were unclear, but because they were too clear, too certain. I will see you tonight. No question, no explanation, just a statement that felt like it had already happened somewhere ahead of me. The train rattled along the tracks beneath my feet, the city blurring past the windows, people around me scrolling on their phones, talking, living their lives like nothing had shifted, and I stood there holding onto a metal pole like it was the only stable thing left, my thumb hovering over the screen, tempted to respond, to ask what he meant, to demand that he stay out of my life. But something stopped me, something quiet and instinctive, the same part of me that had gone still when he said my name, because I knew, somehow, that asking questions would not give me control, it would just confirm that he already had it. So I locked my phone instead, slipping it back into my bag like that could create distance between me and whatever this was. I focused on the rhythm of the train, the familiar stops, the announcements echoing through the car, grounding myself in something normal, something predictable, because tonight was hours away and I needed to get through the present first. I had a shift. I had responsibilities. I had a son who expected me to show up the way I always did, and no man, no matter how controlled or certain, was going to take that from me. I repeated that in my head as the train slowed, as the doors opened, as I stepped out onto the platform and followed the crowd up the stairs into daylight again. The air felt warmer here, heavier, filled with the scent of coffee and street food and everything ordinary that made up my world. I walked straight to the coffee shop, tying my apron behind my back with practiced hands, the routine slipping over me like armor, simple, repetitive, safe, orders, receipts, smiles, small talk. It should have been enough to distract me, but it was not, because every time the door opened, my attention snapped up without permission. Every time my phone buzzed, my pulse followed, and by the time my shift ended, I was more exhausted than I had been that morning, not physically, but mentally, like I had been holding tension for hours without release. I checked my phone the second I stepped outside. No new messages, just that one line still sitting there, unchanged. And somehow that made it worse, because it meant he did not need to repeat himself. He did not need to remind me. He trusted that I would be exactly where he expected me to be, and I hated that assumption more than anything. I walked faster than usual toward the subway, my thoughts racing ahead to Lucas, to his smile, to the way he would run toward me when he saw me, grounding, real, mine. I reached the school just before pickup time, scanning the entrance until I saw him, small backpack slipping off one shoulder, his eyes lighting up the second he spotted me. And just like that, everything else faded. I knelt as he ran into me, his arms wrapping around my neck, and I held on to him a second longer than usual, breathing him in, reminding myself that this was what mattered. "Did you have a good day?" I asked, pulling back to look at him, and he nodded eagerly, already talking about something that happened in class, his voice bright, unaffected, untouched by anything that had shifted in my world. I smiled, listening, responding, staying present, because he deserved that. He always did. We walked home together, his hand in mine. The familiar route, the same cracked sidewalks, the same corner store, the same building waiting at the end of the block. Everything exactly as it had always been. And for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe it could stay that way, that maybe whatever had started that morning would stay contained in that building, in that room, in that version of my day that felt separate from this one. But as we reached our door, as I pulled out my keys and pushed it open, something felt off immediately. Not wrong, not broken, just different. Like the air had shifted slightly, like something had been placed there quietly. Without disturbing anything else, I stepped inside slowly, Lucas already moving past me toward his room, dropping his bag like he always did. And that was when I saw it, sitting on the small table near the entrance, something that had not been there when I left that morning. A neatly wrapped box, simple, elegant, with no label, no note, just a single detail that made my breath catch, my name written across the top in clean, precise handwriting, Emily. I did not touch the box right away. I just stood there in the doorway with my keys still in my hand, staring at something that should not have been inside my home. Because this space was mine, small, imperfect, but mine, and nothing entered it without my permission, not bills, not strangers, not anything. And yet there it was, placed neatly like it belonged, like whoever left it had not hesitated for a second. "Mom?" Lucas called from his room, his voice light, unaware, and I forced my eyes away from the box, pushing the door closed behind me with more care than usual, like I was trying not to disturb something invisible. "I am here," I answered, steady, normal, because whatever this was, it was not his to carry. I stepped past the table without stopping, moving toward him first, because that mattered more, because he mattered more. I found him on the floor with his crayons already scattered, drawing something I did not recognize, and I knelt beside him, brushing a hand gently over his hair, grounding myself in something real, something safe. "What are you drawing?" I asked, and he smiled up at me, holding up the paper like it was important, like it meant something. "A tree," he said proudly, and I nodded, even though the branches looked uneven and the colors did not quite match anything I had seen before. It did not matter. It was his. It was simple. It was right. I stayed there a minute longer than I needed to, watching him, listening to him talk about his day, about a friend who traded snacks with him, about a teacher who said he was doing well, all the small things that made up his world, all the things that reminded me why I could not let anything disrupt this, not even someone like him, not even whatever this situation was turning into. When I finally stood, I felt it again, that quiet pull back toward the front of the apartment, toward the box, like it had weight beyond its size, like ignoring it was not going to make it disappear. I walked back slowly, each step deliberate, my eyes fixed on it now, the clean edges, the careful wrapping, the handwriting that was too precise to be casual, too intentional to be random. My name looked different in that script, like it had been written by someone who had already decided something about me. I set my keys down beside it, the sound sharper than usual in the quiet room, and for a second, I just stood there, listening, not for anything specific, just for confirmation that I was still alone, that nothing else had changed, but the silence stayed the same, steady, unchanged. I reached out finally, my fingers brushing the edge of the box, and the contact sent a small, unexpected tension through me. Not fear, just awareness, like this was a line I could not uncross once I stepped over it. I exhaled slowly and pulled the ribbon loose, the motion careful, controlled, like I was handling something fragile even though I did not know what it was yet. The lid lifted easily, no resistance, no sound, just a quiet reveal that felt too deliberate to be accidental. Inside, there was no note, no explanation, just a single item resting in the center, a photograph. I frowned slightly, confusion cutting through the tension as I picked it up, the edges worn, not new, not recent, something that had existed long before today, long before that room. My eyes dropped to the image, and my breath caught before I could stop it. It was a picture of a small girl, standing beside a tree, uneven branches stretching above her, her smile bright, unaware, her face turned slightly toward the camera, and for a second, I did not recognize her, not fully, not immediately, because memory does not always arrive all at once. Sometimes it hesitates, sometimes it waits, but then it settled, sharp and undeniable, because I knew that face, I knew that tree. I knew that moment even if I had not thought about it in years. It was me. I felt it then, not just confusion, not just unease, something deeper, something colder, because this was not just about today anymore. This was not about a wrong room or a strange interview. This reached further back, into something I had forgotten or maybe never understood in the first place. And as I stared at that photograph, one thought pressed forward, quiet but impossible to ignore. He had not just found me today. He had known me long before I ever walked into that building. The room felt smaller as I held the photograph, like the walls had shifted in a way I could not see but could definitely feel, my fingers tightening slightly around the worn edges as memories tried to surface. Not fully formed, just fragments, flashes of sunlight through branches, the smell of summer air, the distant echo of laughter that did not quite belong to me anymore. I swallowed, forcing my breathing to stay even, because panic would not help me understand this, and understanding was the only thing that mattered now. "Mom, can I have juice?" Lucas called again, his voice pulling me back instantly, grounding me before I could fall too far into something I was not ready to face. I set the photograph back into the box carefully, like it was something fragile, something that could break if I handled it the wrong way, and closed the lid, pushing it slightly to the side of the table. out of direct view, not hidden, but not center anymore either. I moved into the kitchen, pouring juice into his cup with steady hands that did not match the way my thoughts were racing. Coming, I said, keeping my voice light. Normal, because he deserved that version of me, not the one standing at the edge of something unknown. I handed him the cup, watched him take it without noticing anything different. And that was when I realized how separate our worlds still were, how untouched his life remained, and I needed to keep it that way. No matter what this became, I returned to the front of the apartment slowly, my eyes drawn back to the box without trying. Like it had become a fixed point I could not ignore, I opened it again, more carefully this time, studying the photograph with intention instead of shock, the details sharper now. The way the tree leaned slightly to one side, the uneven ground beneath my feet, the small bracelet on my wrist that I vaguely remembered losing not long after. And then something else, something I had not noticed at first, the edge of another figure just barely visible at the side of the frame, not fully captured, just a shadow of a presence, a shoulder, part of an arm, someone who had been there but not meant to be seen. My breath slowed, my mind working through it piece by piece, because this was not random, this was not coincidence, this was chosen, placed, delivered with purpose. I turned the photograph over, expecting something, a date, a note, anything that would explain it. But the back was blank, completely empty, and somehow that felt more deliberate than if there had been words, because it meant the message was not meant to be read. It was meant to be understood. My phone buzzed again, sharp in the quiet room, and this time I did not hesitate. I picked it up immediately. The same unknown number lighting the screen. Another message, simple, precise, just like before. You remember the tree? My heart skipped, not dramatically, just enough to make the silence around me feel heavier. I stared at the words, my reflection faintly visible in the screen, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it, pretending I had not seen it. But that would not change anything. It would not stop whatever this was. And I needed answers more than I needed distance now. My fingers moved. Before I could overthink it, typing slowly, deliberately. Who are you? The message sent, the screen quiet again, the seconds stretching longer than they should have. And then it appeared, immediate, like he had been waiting. Adrian Moretti. The name settled into something real, something defined, and with it came a shift, because now this was not just a presence, not just a voice. It was a person, a name that belonged somewhere, that carried weight I did not yet understand. I exhaled slowly, my eyes drifting back to the photograph in my hand, to the girl I used to be standing under a tree I had almost forgotten, and for the first time, I felt it clearly, not confusion, not fear, but something else, something sharper, curiosity, because if he knew this, if he had this, then there was a part of my past that did not belong only to me, and I needed to know why. The name stayed on the screen longer than it should have. Adrian Moretti, like it carried weight I could feel, but not measure yet. And I stood there in the quiet of my apartment, holding a photograph of a life I barely remembered, realizing that whatever this was, it had already connected two versions of me that I had never thought to question before, my past and my present sitting in the same space for the first time. I looked down at the image again, tracing the outline of the tree with my eyes, the way the branches stretched unevenly, the way the light hit the ground, and something shifted in my memory, not a full recollection, just a flicker, a feeling of standing there and not being alone, of someone just outside the frame, watching, waiting. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the photo as I tried to hold on to that feeling, to pull it into something clearer, but it slipped just out of reach, like it had been buried too deep or hidden too well. Mom. Lucas called again, softer this time, and I closed my eyes for a second, grounding myself, because whatever this was, it could not take over everything. Not him, not this space. I placed the photograph back into the box carefully and set it aside again, more intentionally now, not as something to ignore, but as something I would come back to when I was ready. I moved toward him, helping with homework, making dinner, following the rhythm of our routine like it was something solid I could rely on. But even as I stirred a pot on the stove, even as I listened to him talk about his day, my mind kept circling back to the same point. The same question, why would someone like him have something like that? Why would he send it now? Why would he say I should not be here? The hours passed slowly. each minute stretching towards something I could not see but knew was coming. The light outside faded, the apartment grew quieter. Lucas eventually drifting off to sleep with his usual routine, a story, a glass of water. I promised that I would be right there if he needed me. I stayed beside him a little longer than usual, watching the steady rise and fall of his breathing, making sure he was really asleep before I stepped back into the part of the night that did not feel as safe anymore. The apartment was still, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel louder, and I stood near the door again, the same place where I had found the box. My eyes drifting to it without thinking, I picked it up once more, holding it for a second like it might offer something new, something clearer, but it remained exactly what it was, a piece of a story I did not fully understand. My phone buzzed again, and this time, I did not hesitate. I picked it up immediately, another message from the same number. You are ready now? My breath slowed, not from calm, but from focus, because this was it. This was the moment everything had been moving towards since that morning. I typed back before I could second. Guess it, ready for what? The reply came almost instantly. Look outside. My heart picked up, not wildly, just enough to sharpen everything around me. I turned slowly toward the window, each step measured, controlled, like I was walking towards something that could not be undone. The city lights flickered beyond the glass, cars passing, people moving, everything normal, everything unchanged, and then I saw it, parked directly across